So Christopher Nolan's Tenet is a great idea in the same way that Nolan assembled his sci-fi films of Inception and Interstellar, where they have these big, vast, and grand ideas. But usually he would boil them down to like a simpler, a simpler type of film. Like, Interstellar was all about, expressing love that can last the ages. And then, Inception was more about the whole internal heist type deal. But Tenet is one of those films that it feels like it has a great idea. This whole idea of inverting time and reversing everything. But it feels like it spends so much time saying, "Oh, look how cool this idea is," and then doesn't really spend much time giving it that extra bit of thematic greatness or gravitas, and providing a little bit more character on top of it, and providing some arcs that make them kind of like meaningful and very human. It feels very cold in this regard. And this is mostly because it feels like everything else around the premise is kind of lackluster. Like, the hero we follow here is played by John David Washington, who's a CIA agent who doesn't have a name, and so he's only referred to as the protagonist. Now, this isn't one of those deals with, like, They Live, where we don't learn the name of the hero and they're just kind of referred to as Nada, or, like, the man with no name. He's just kind of called the man with no name because they never really give him a name in the film. But within this film, they constantly refer to him as the protagonist. Like, there are several moments where Washington is trying to get an idea of where he's at within this plot and says basically, "So I'm the protagonist in this story." Like, I think there's literally a line in here where he says, "But I'm the protagonist." So we don't really learn much about his character. We know that he's a dedicated CIA agent. We watch him in an opening mission where he has to infiltrate a opera house during a terrorist operation, which is very exciting. But then it's revealed that he doesn't quite save the day, and he loses his team. But because he is willing to throw himself out there, he becomes more trusted by the CIA to take on heavier missions. And the bigger mission that he's given here is that he has to find out what's going on with some weapons that are traveling backwards through time. So a scientist introduced him to a firearm that essentially doesn't fire bullets but catches them. So in other words, it will you aim it at something that already has a bullet hole in it, and it will catch that bullet. But the bullet itself has to be going back through time as well, as does the weapon that's firing it. So then, and I think this is like the key problem with the film. This is the one scene that I think kind of ruins it, is once Washington learns about this, he asks like one of the more immediate philosophical questions one would ask about this, which is, okay, if the weapons are traveling backwards through time, then then it means that stuff has already happened to it. So how much control do we as individuals have over something that goes backwards through time? And it's an interesting question, but it's never quite addressed in the way that it should be, because the scientist basically reasons that, oh, yeah, well, we're still here and we still had to affect it. So we kind of have free will, but by the end of the film, it will just say, no, we don't really have free will. It's just, whatever happens in the timeline in order for our timeline to exist, with us jumping backwards and forwards through it, we're pretty much locked into whatever, what's going to happen has happened. Like, I think they literally say at the end of the film, like, whatever happens, happens. Like, it already happened, so what's the point in worrying about the future? Which robs a lot of the suspense from the second half of the film, because in the first half of the film, we're given all these little clues where we're like, oh, that kind of looked like something weird. How did that happen? Or what's going on here? And then the mystery is revealed that it's actually, agents and other things that are traveling back through time from the stuff that happened in the first act. So everything happens in the first act, is basically sets up what's going to happen in the second act. So we more or less know what's going to happen in the second act. And that's, the second half of the film. And that's kind of ruined by the fact that the main villain here, who we eventually find out is Andre, played by Kenneth Branagh, who's a Russian oligarch who came into this future technology that allows him to send stuff backwards and forwards through time. And and I can't. Andre kind of feels like the embodiment of this film. Like he has grand ideas for what he wants to do with this tech, and it seems very mysterious and bizarre. I'm like, what's he gonna do with all this stuff? But by the end of the film, it kind of just seems like he wants to just blow up everything. Kind of like what Nolan did with The Dark Knight Rises. Bane starts with a great idea of trying to dismantle, Gotham's elite and try to, tackle like the whole class warfare thing. But ultimately, he just wants to blow up Gotham with a nuke. And that's pretty much the same thing here. Like, it's meant to reflect Andre's bitterness towards his wife, or his ex-wife, rather, played by Elizabeth Debicki. And it's basically, if I can't have you, no one can have you, which is why he's super abusive. And so it basically uses that same reasoning for, if my life sucks, then everyone's life would suck. Although his life doesn't really seem like it sucks that much, because he's got like a huge yacht and tons of money and everything, and he's got this future tech. I don't know, maybe there's a nihilism within him that just wants to see everything burn, that little Joker in him, whatever. But the thing is, like, so there's not much to Andre. There's a little bit to Kat, the ex-wife here. She has a little bit of an arc. She has something worth saving here. She has a son who she wants to protect from Andre. She's beaten by Andre, so she wants her revenge. She has the most stake in this mission. That it's a little bit refreshing that she's more active in the second half of the film as opposed to just being someone who needs saving from John David Washington. Who also kind of gets with her a little bit. There's a little bit of romance between them. And I think most of that's just kind of reflected by the fact that, in typical Nolan fashion, it's got this very big kind of like James Bond aspect to it. Like, we hop all around the world. We go to Mumbai, and we go to like a couple other countries. And it's maddening because like the film is so great to look at. The special effects are neat. There's some cool car chases that use the whole reversing of time angle that's pretty neat. The climax where it takes place in a war zone where you basically have two teams, one of them going forward through time, one of them going backwards through time, and they can't see each other while they do it because then they will more or less spoil what's going to be the outcome here. It's kind of cool because like they try to help each other out in both timelines by making a building explode on one end and then not explode on the other, and then try to figure out each other's actions and try to help each other to stop basically time and space from exploding. Basically, I'm gathering what Andre's trying to do here. But like I said, the big problem with this is because they're traveling backwards through time, and we see their actions reflected in the first half of the film. We more or less know what's going to happen in the second half of the film. And there isn't really anything that kind of like throws a curveball into it or throws it off. Because you would think that, I kind of get the fact that, John David Washington would be a little bit in the moment and distracted and angry to not notice what role he would play in the car chase that goes backwards and forwards. But when we sort of learn the secret to it and sort of the trick that goes along here, we can kind of connect the dots and figure out, where every character is going to be at which point in time, and it kind of robs the suspense of that. Moreover, we also know what's going to happen with Andre's plan. We know that he's not going to destroy all of time and space because the characters we're seeing reflective have already done that in the timeline here. Now, the thing is, I can't help but feel like if there was just one moment in here in the second half that threw everything off. Like, there's a moment where, okay, I see, Washington's going to go here. We saw this in the first half. It's just going to be reflected in the next part. Something to throw it off. Just something. And there are several moments where they say, they show all this stuff that can go wrong. They say, if you travel backwards through time, you can't quite breathe the oxygen. So you have to, wear an oxygen mask. Or, you'll feel elements differently. So in other words, if there's fire, you will experience cold and all this crazy crap like that. And the grandfather paradox. And if you touch yourself in the same timeline, you will essentially erase yourself and create a paradox. And none of that happens here. Pretty much everyone just proceeds along the track that they're set on. Like, even there's a moment where Robert Pattinson's character of Neil, who also doesn't really have much character, basically witnesses Washington traveling backwards through time at one point and doesn't say anything because he doesn't want to throw off the track here. It's basically he's like, okay, I know my role to play, and I know that if we want to preserve the timeline, I can't say anything until the very end of the film, even though it's revealed to us and we're questioning, well, why doesn't he reveal that? And it's like, it's just because he's on like the timeline track. He doesn't want to veer off and doesn't want to disrupt anything. He doesn't want to cause a paradox. It's like, this is one of those films that's perfect for someone who doesn't like watching films where people make mistakes. They're just like, oh, why did that character do that? Oh, that's embarrassing. I don't want to see them do that. And of course, they're making these mistakes because it makes the film more interesting and it throws stuff off and it gives more suspense and it gives the character more to work towards. It's typical second and third act stuff. But here, everyone pretty much does, by like the timeline, they do what they're expected to do within it. There's nothing really that we see in the first half that isn't showcased in the second half that proceeds along the cyclical nature of the timeline. But there's a moment early on where the scientist basically just says, don't think, feel, which is essentially the film's way of saying, don't try to think too much about this time travel logic. It doesn't make too much sense and it's just going to make your brain melt. So just enjoy the spectacle of it. And it would be, and it's kind of troubling to enjoy the spectacle of it and not think too much about the whole concept of free will and the inversion and reversing of time, for two reasons. One is because immediately after that scene, it's like, okay, we're launched into the heist operation. But the heist is very complex and dense and revealed to us way too quickly. We're revealed a lot of information is dumped on our laps. Like, okay, we have to find out who's getting these time inversed weapons. So where are they coming from? Well, it comes from this dealer, and this dealer knows this person, and this person has this person has an ex-wife, and this person has art in a gallery. Maybe we can get to them through there. And it's all very. And it's all just kind of like unloaded in the first act, with not a whole lot of character because, like I said, it's trying to keep everything mysterious, even though by the end of the film, there's not a whole lot that's revealed by keeping, the protagonist and Neil a secret. So there's not a whole lot to that. But the other problem is that even if we were to just enjoy these scenes, which, don't get me wrong, they look cool. Like, there's a cool stunt in Mumbai where Washington and Pattinson basically have to slingshot up a building. That stuff is cool. The car chase is cool. The war zone's cool. There are a few fight scenes that are cool. There's a great scene where John Washington gets to beat someone with a cheese grater, so that's kind of fun. But the big problem with these scenes is on a technical level, is that you can't really hear what the characters are saying when they have dialogue within them. Like, there are several scenes where characters are talking to each other while they're in the middle of like a gunfight or a car chase, or an explosion, and we can't really hear them just because, the mixing is really bad here. Like, either the music is cranked up too loud or the effects are cranked up too loud. And it doesn't really help too that the characters have spend most of their time covered behind gas masks and oxygen masks. So their voices are also muffled by that. And I mean, even with that, you would think, well, you still have ADR, you could fix that, and it doesn't work here. Not that being said, there isn't a lot of dialogue here you really got to pay attention to, especially during the action scenes. There's a whole lot of nothing there, especially when the scenes that are not expositional, where the characters are trying to show some charisma and have some fun with it, they're just kind of dead one-liners. Like there's a scene where John Washington is basically confronted by some hitmen, and he follows them into a kitchen, and before the fight starts, he says, "I ordered my guacamole an hour ago." It's like, okay, the one-liner really doesn't work here. Maybe if it had a better setup, it could work, but it just doesn't. But, he kind of wins. You're like, okay, let's just get to the scene where John David Washington smashes a guy's face with a cheese grater. That's fun, I guess. So, yeah, there are fun moments within this film, but in terms of thinking of the grander thematic aspects and the conception of free will and the whole palindromic nature of, the beginning the same way it ends, there's a lot that falls short here. And I wish it could work better here because the production is pretty damn cool. It could use some tweaks technically here and there with, like the sound mixing, stuff like that, but it's really lacking in that character and that personal drive to really make it hit like Inception and Interstellar. Like, it feels like it always came back to something more personal by the end of those films. And here it really kind of doesn't. And also kind of leaves you with kind of a bitter taste in your mouth about the whole concept of that we don't really have much free will, and more so that the protagonist doesn't really have much free will. Like by the end is basically he's told like, look, whatever happens, and he's just like, oh god, man, that's kind of like a very disparaging thought, you know. It's like how much control do I have over my actions then if everything's been preordained and I've seen everything, you know? So Tenet, you know, like the whole palindromic nature of the title itself couldn't be more fitting. You know, this is a film that starts off with great ideas and ambition, and it just kind of ends with little else, you know. So for Tenet, 2.5 out of 5 stars.